boy, people are really gonna hate me for this one. Welcome to today's video, where we're going to be doing a stand review for Hierophant Green. 3 months ago, I put out a video entitled Hierophant Green Doesn't Work, and in that video, I talked about exactly why Hierophant Green was a complete disaster on a technical level. The main thing that I covered in that video was the fact that the marionette control was barely functional. At the time of posting that video, marionette control barely ever worked. There were a lot of scenarios where if you used it on an opponent, whether they were doing an attack, whether they were stunned, whether they were block broken, whether they were parried, all of those scenarios, if any of them occurred when they were hit by marionette control, the move just wouldn't function. Nothing would happen. They would get hit by the move, but they could still block, they could still dash, they could still attack, they could do just about anything. And because of that, I basically said, I can't use this stand. It's basically non-functional. The main move that you need to use in order to make it work doesn't work. And because of that, I'm not gonna be reviewing it until it's fixed. Well, in the Halloween update, they fixed it. Not after making it completely brick you if you got hit by the move, but after they fixed the bricking issue, now Hierophant Green is functional. Some things still don't work, like the Emerald Barrier's projectiles being tied to frame rate for whatever reason, but for the most part, Hierophant Green works now. And the results of Hierophant Green working are honestly less than stellar. All that fixing Hierophant Green really did is reveal just how flawed from a game design perspective this stand really is. It is one of, if not the most cheesy stands in the entire game, and I don't think much else comes close. You fish for one move the entire game, and if you land it, your opponent takes almost all their health. Sounds like fun, I'm sure. But you know what? We'll talk about all that in due time. I'm getting ahead of myself. Rather than talk about all that, let's talk about the moveset and get things started with the actual review. Hierophant Green is a stand that does not have very many moves, but all of the moves that it does have are really good. Starting off where I always start off, we're gonna talk about base destructive power, M1s, the speed, that kind of stuff. Hierophant Green is really weak in this regard. It has a slow overall stand speed, the M1s only do 5.5 damage a hit, your barrage only does 0.9 a hit, the barrage has barely any hits in it, and in essence, Hierophant Green is obviously not meant to be a brawler. I think that goes without saying. Where Hierophant Green really shines though is of course its actual moves. And starting off very solidly with Emerald Splash. Emerald Splash is a move that after a short windup, you fire a barrage of emeralds that deal 1.5 damage each at your opponent. The cone of spread for these emeralds is very large, but since you can pilot at any point, either when you're starting the move, before you start the move, really just any time, you can pilot right up to your opponent and ensure that they get hit with all of the emeralds. This 1.5 pseudo barrage is really strong if you land all of the hits. Not only that, but it's completely unblockable and has a boatload of stun on just a single emerald. One thing you should know is that despite the fact that it looks like you can charge up the move to either have it do more damage or last longer, holding down the Emerald Splash key to charge it up doesn't affect the move whatsoever. This is a common misconception I see a lot, but I can tell you with utmost certainty that charging up Emerald Splash does nothing, so don't bother. Hierophant Green's next move is Marionette Control. You've already heard me kind of talk about this, but I'll explain here why Marionette Control is so problematic. Marionette Control is a blockable, non-perfect blockable, heavy punch lookalike move where if landed, it stuns your opponent for 6 full seconds. During this 6 seconds, your opponent is unable to do anything. Unlike just about every other stun in the game, the opponent isn't even able to do a barrage. There's also, to my knowledge, no way of breaking out of this stun. Whether the victim or the user is ragdolled, the stun seems to continue to apply regardless of the status. Also during the 6 seconds, the opponent is constantly pulled towards the attacker. The attacker, of course, being able to use any move in their moveset to attack the opponent. Next up, and the final real move in Hierophant Green's moveset, and we're going to talk about Emerald Barrier. Emerald Barrier is a move that after you press the key and a short wind-up and animation occur, you'll effectively cover the entire area in tendrils, and anyone who walks into those tendrils is going to get stunned and shot with an Emerald Splash. The barrier lasts around 12 seconds, and as far as I know, doesn't have any sort of limit to the amount of times it can be triggered. The Emerald Splashes that are fired by the barrier are also unblockable, but do not block break. So if the opponent is blocking and gets hit by one of these, their block will drop, but they won't suffer from the block break effect. Another thing to note is that the stun on the Emerald Barrier only stops you from moving, not doing anything else. This means that stands with counters or time skips can either counter you or teleport out of the barrier if they have those moves available. The last and final move is your pilot. Hierophant Green's pilot is highly similar to all the other pilots in the game. You can use it at any point, even while being stunned, and you can use any of your stand's moves while it's active. A little tidbit for you when it comes to Hierophant Green's pilot. Just like some other things that shouldn't be tied to frame rate in this game, Hierophant Green's pilot is one of those things. And honestly, it's a little bit hilarious. If you slow down your frame rate, you can see that it moves at a snail's pace. But if you completely uncap your frame rate, you turn into Sonic the Hedgehog and fly around like a crack addict after a binge. This could probably be considered cheating though, so I wouldn't do this if I were you. Ideally, this just gets fixed. With that though, that's all the moves in Hierophant Green's kit, so we're gonna move on to strategies, and I'll tell you exactly how to use this cheese master of a stand. I've already said it, and I'm going to be saying it again here, but marionette control is basically this entire stand. Marionette control is mad busted. A 6-second stun where no one can do anything during it, that's a recipe for disaster. And unsurprisingly, when you have that paired with the Emerald Barrier, you've got the cheese stand that we have today. Now, some of you are probably asking how exactly you do all this nonsense, considering that nobody plays Hierophant Green, so odds are you've got no clue. And the answer is simple: the boxing spec. Who's surprised that boxing is really, really good with Hierophant Green? It's good with just about everything, but with Hierophant Green, it's very good. I have a sneaking suspicion that Vampire might be even better for Hierophant Green, but I can't be bothered to go get Vampire, so I'll be talking about it with boxing. Just take my word for it that Vampire has a good chance of being better, but all the stuff that I'm telling you about boxing also applies to that. Back on topic though, Jawbreaker while the enemy is marionette controlled is crazy strong. Why is it crazy strong? Well, it removes their stand, but they're still marionette controlled. What does it mean for us? Well, it means that you can combo someone for free when they don't have their stand. If you land a marionette control as Hierophant Green, the first thing you should do is Jawbreaker them to get rid of their stand. After that, you can throw out a few M1s in order to soften them up, and then put down your Emerald Barrier. The Emerald Barrier is going to help us loop marionette controls all over again. After you put the barrier down and your control's about to end, hit them with an eye gouge. After you've got them with an eye gouge, throw in an M1 and then barrage, and make sure to keep them inside of the barrier. Once you see that your marionette control is off of cooldown, make sure that you have the opponent trigger the barrier, and the second you hear the noise for the Emerald Splash, use the marionette control again. Because your opponent is going to get stuck in the barrier and shot by the emeralds, it should be timed just to line up with when they get hit with the emeralds and they're still stunned to marionette control them again. Once they're marionette controlled, you can hit them with another Jawbreaker to add on the damage. More M1s, then when it's about to end, you eye gouge, do a barrage, and then if you're feeling greedy, you can try to go for an Emerald Splash. Regardless of what you do during this, if you land the entire thing, there's a good chance that over half of your opponent's health has evaporated. This whole string of combos is really not that hard to learn. Normally when I do stand reviews, I play them a whole lot before I do the review. This time around, I honestly really didn't. And despite that, I was fairly easily able to learn this kind of stuff in maybe 3 hours. And that was trying to figure it out, not actually implementing it. So honestly, if you have brain cells, you can start doing this stuff in maybe a half hour maximum. It's not hard, and God, it must suck to fight. Basically, the lesson of the day is fish for marionette control. Sometimes fishing for marionette control isn't an option though. It gets canceled if you get hit, it's blockable, smart people are going to try not to get hit by it. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. That's where your Emerald Splash and Pilot come in. Emerald Splash is a really good move when paired with Pilot. Once you start getting a knack for where the emeralds are gonna go, it'll be very easy for you to catch people. And once you start reliably catching people with Emerald Splash, you can just slowly chip out their health. Since the Emerald Splash has such a low cooldown and Pilot has basically no cooldown, this is almost a get out of jail free card, just gets free damage whenever it's off of cooldown move as long as you're using it correctly. Assuming that we're talking about a matchup where you can't just go for marionette control cheese, your barrier is also just generally a good tool to keep the opponent off of you. People don't want to run into the barrier. This isn't anything new. This means that you can use the barrier into baiting people into doing stupid things. If you used Emerald Splash and Pilot enough to frustrate your opponent into wanting to get at you every time you do it, if you throw down a barrier and then use an Emerald Splash, a lot of the time the opponent's gonna get mad, try to get you out of it, and get stuck in the barrier. If they get stuck in the barrier, marionette control, jawbreaker, eye gouge, and then another Emerald Splash. You can't get quite as much damage since you don't have the barrier to cheese with anymore, but it's still going to get you a boatload of damage off your opponent doing something stupid. Last note on the Pilot, and hopefully one of these days this won't be advice that I have to give you, but since it can be used during stun, if you ever start getting comboed, you can just barrage, use the Pilot, push the person back, and then let go of your barrage and get out of jail for free. It's a stupid mechanic, it shouldn't exist, but it's here, so you might as well use it. Wrapping that up though, and that's about it for strategies for Hierophant Green. The stand is incredibly simple and easy to use, and despite all those things, it is also incredibly frustrating to fight against. And I guess the simplicity adds to the frustration. So some of you are probably asking how to deal with this, and I'll be telling you momentarily. So enjoy the counterplay section. Countering Hierophant Green really comes down to knowing the matchup, knowing what you can do against their options, and knowing what they can do against yours. So really, honestly, when it comes down to it, a lot of winning is experience. But I'll do my best to cut out the middleman as much as I can and tell you general tips against trying to fight against Hierophant Green. First of all, this stand dies to Mouse 1. M1s obliterate Hierophant Green. Hierophant Green's options when it comes to dealing with M1s are extremely limited, and its damage output with M1s is also super low. If you have even a medium destructive power stand, the Hierophant Green player in all likelihood is going to need to hit double or more of the amount of M1s you need to hit them with in order to win the match. They're almost entirely reliant on their spec moves and their stand moves. And this means that if you have a stand that can put on an endless amount of pressure, you should, in theory, win by just mashing. Hierophant Green needs to set up all of its nonsense, and if you're mashing, they just can't do that. This mashing does have to be balanced though, because depending on who you're playing against, your matchup could be completely different. Since Hierophant Green players are obviously going to know that they're going to lose to mashing, they're probably going to play a lot more passive, hiding in their barrier, throwing out piloted Emerald Splashes, that kind of stuff. But the thing is, Emerald Splash does get canceled if you get ragdolled, something that I think a lot of people don't know. It doesn't need to be a stand crash. Literally any ragdoll cancels Emerald Splash. If you have a time skip, you've probably beaten Hierophant Green by default. Why is this? Well, if you see them start charging their Emerald Splash, you just time skip on them and use a heavy punch, and it's gone. That's off the table. They can't use it. Your time skip cooldown is about the same as Emerald Splash's cooldown. So assuming you're not wasting your time skips, every time that they have their Emerald Splash up, you can cancel it. No extra damage for that. And now that you're on top of them, you can go back to mashing. They run away, they put down the barrier, business as usual. Just wait. Trying to fight against Hierophant Green while they're in their barrier is a death sentence, even if you have a counter. Just don't do it. A lot of counters aren't actually going to win you the trade. You'll end up losing even if you land them. On paper, it sounds pretty good if you use something like Anubis's counter. It's invincible and you should get away with it. That is until the counter ends and you're still in the barrier and then you get marionette controlled. Those kind of risks aren't worth taking. Hierophant Green can punish you too hard for being in the barrier, so you should just wait it out. That being said, the advice I just gave you does contradict itself. I said you should time skip on them or run at them and stop them from using their Emerald Splash, but then I also said don't go in the barrier. So what happens if they use the barrier and then shoot you with Emerald Splash? This is where you just need to be evasive and run the other direction. At this point, you're gonna take damage. That's just a reality. There's no stopping the damage. If you try to stop the damage, odds are you're just gonna take more damage. So if they put the barrier down and they do an Emerald Splash, run the other way and try to get hit as little as possible. The more time that they're desperately trying to hit you with just one Emerald Splash so that they can hit you with the rest of the move, the less damage you're gonna be taking from it. Hold the jump key, randomly deviate your movements, go the other way. And finally, if you do get stuck in the barrier, the question becomes, what do you do? And your options in the barrier are either really limited or really good depending on the stand you're playing. So, like I said, comes back down to matchup dependence. If you have something like a time skip, the barrier can be almost useless. They put it down, you get stuck, you just time skip out, and that's the end of it. Certain other moves can be situationally useful depending on if you get hit by the Emerald Splashes that come out when you get hit with the barrier. Things like the World's Road Roller can either be really good or really bad in the barrier. If your Road Roller comes out before you get hit by any Emerald Splashes, you're good to go, and you're probably also going to punish the Hierophant Green. But if you get hit and it cancels it, well, now you're stuck. A lot of the stands in the game have options to deal with the barrier, and at the end of the day, you just need to be out of there before you get Marionette controlled. As for counterplay for when you get Marionette controlled, there is none. You're stuck. I mean it, there's literally zero. Don't get hit by Marionette control. And after telling you that if you get hit with Marionette control it's hopeless, that's it for the counterplay section. With that, we'll move over to the conclusion and wrap things up. The conclusion of this video is an indecisive one at best. And that's mostly because I want to try to keep my personal bias out of it and say for sure whether or not this stand really needs something done about it. Because let's be real here, no one's playing Hierophant Green, so why change something nobody's playing? But then the also thing you have to consider is that most YBA players aren't up to experimenting with new things and would rather just use the established meta. Most of the people playing are using KCR boxing, SCR boxing, Star Planet of the World boxing, you know, the whole 9 yards. And so the amount of people that are thinking to themselves, oh, Marionette control got fixed, maybe that means that Hierophant Green could be really good now. Those people are few and far between. And so will this video bring Hierophant Green to the limelight and a bunch of people will use it? Will it be the usual where I do a review on something and it floods ranked for a week and then it's never seen again? Who knows? But at the end of the day, I really don't know the answer on whether or not it should be changed or even if it should be, what could be done. I don't necessarily think that the solution is make it so you can do stuff in Marionette control, because then what's the point of Marionette control? And if you reduce the amount of time that people are stunned by it, then what is the point of it? Again, like landing it doesn't mean a whole lot. And just because something is obnoxious to fight doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be gone. A whole lot of games have things that are seriously annoying to fight, but they're still around because, like I said, just because it's annoying doesn't mean that it's unbalanced. And in this case, I think it could be one of those situations. I can't tell you for certainty if Hierophant Green is unbalanced or not. I can tell you that it's really annoying, but unbalanced, I don't know. So at this point, I defer to you guys. Do you think that Hierophant Green is a problem? Do you think it's fine? Have you even used it? How many Hierophant Greens have you actually seen in ranked? My bet is not very many. But regardless of those things, I'm done here. The question remains unanswered, and I leave it in your hands. If you enjoyed this video, you learned anything, that kind of stuff, you can leave a like, subscribe. If you didn't, don't do those things. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you next time.